The next movie to talk about is Captain America Civil War, and this is one of the first MCU movies to bring a true moral conflict not just with the characters but with the fans as well. So Captain America, Black Widow, Falcon and Wanda are carrying out this mission in Lagos, Nigeria, not Lagos like they always say. It's the most annoying thing ever. They get word that Brock Rumlow, the same agent who attacked Captain America in the elevator in Winter Soldier, has rounded up a crew and they are trying to raid an infectious disease center so that they can obtain a very dangerous virus. Unfortunately, that mission goes wrong and a ton of people are killed in the process. Meanwhile, after speaking at a workshop at MIT, Tony Stark is confronted by this mother who says because of the Avengers, her son lost his life. And because these events have had no regulation whatsoever, the United Nations decides to step in and introduce the Sokovia Accords, essentially trying to regulate the activities of superheroes. So it's more of the difference in opinions that makes the framework of this movie exactly what it is. Then there was a UN convention in Geneva where T'Chaka, the king of Wakanda, and his son T'Challa show up, willing to show a sign that they are welcoming of the Sokovia Accords. But unfortunately, a bombing takes place and it kills T'Chaka, and T'Challa is out for revenge. And because Bucky Barnes, Captain America's best friend, has been on the run for a while, a lot of people instantly suspect him, and that's exactly what T'Challa does. He goes after Bucky. It's then revealed that T'Challa is the Black Panther and Bucky is captured and taken to this high security facility for holding. And then whilst they are all in that high security facility, suddenly everything goes into lockdown and no one can control anything. A man then approaches the place where Bucky is being held and has this code book which kind of controls Bucky. This is the code book that is used to activate the Winter Soldier, and this form of control is made possible due to the programming of his cybernetic arm. So somehow Bucky escapes and Cap decides he has to go after his friend to make sure he is okay, and this is where we start to see the very clear divide in whose side you should be on. Meanwhile, Clint Barton faces the Vision and actually manages to break Wanda out of Avengers HQ. In the meantime, Tony Stark, who has been monitoring Cap's actions, decides he has a backup plan and goes to Queens, New York, where he meets a young Peter Parker who has been Spider-Man for a few months at this point in time. He convinces his Aunt May that they are going on a field trip of sorts, and then they end up in an airport in Germany. And then somehow Falcon was able to abduct and bring Scott Lang to the German airport as well. And they did get some help from Peggy Carter's niece, Sharon Carter. So eventually the lines are drawn for a conflict, and on one side you have Captain America, Bucky Barnes, Sam Wilson, Wanda Maximoff, Scott Lang as Ant-Man, and Clint Barton, Hawkeye, going up against the team of Iron Man, Rhodey, Natasha Romanoff, Vision, T'Challa, and Spider-Man. And in the middle of the battle, Natasha switches allegiances to Captain America's side, helping him and Bucky to escape. Unfortunately, in this battle, Rhodey suffered this nasty fall after Vision hit him, and this caused him to suffer paralysis. Meanwhile, Tony imprisons Sam, Wanda, Scott, and Clint in the wrapped prison. And then Tony gets information of where Cap and Bucky are, which is somewhere around Siberia. But unknown to them, Baron Zemo has been watching the whole time, orchestrating every single move of doom that's caused the Avengers to fall at this point. Captain America and Bucky come into this bunker where they find out that Bucky was not the only Winter Soldier there was, because there are other cryogenically frozen people in these pods, but unfortunately they've been shot by someone already, so no resurrection for you. And when Tony shows up and he and Cap try to have a conversation, Baron Zemo finds a way to reveal the biggest secret of this movie, and it was the fact that Tony Stark's parents, Howard and Susan, were murdered at the hands of Bucky Barnes, the Winter Soldier, in 1991. Tony got emotionally charged and started trying to fight Bucky, but because Cap stood in the way, it led to this epic battle between the two men, which ended with Cap smashing Tony's arc reactor in the chest and depowering his suit. But Tony, being the kid that has to have all the toys, said, "My father made that shield, you don't deserve it," and so Captain America dropped the shield. And so the Avengers at this point were completely separated from one another. Tony and Cap at loggerheads at this point. Cap actually was able to break out the four members in the wrapped prison. In the post-credit scene, we see that Steve and Bucky have made it to Wakanda, and T'Challa has offered to help Bucky and get all the software nonsense that was in his arm out of him so that he wouldn't be susceptible to any more control at the hands of the Winter Soldier code book. Oh, and earlier Zemo tried to kill himself, but T'Challa stopped him and imprisoned him, seeing as he was the main main culprit of everything that went wrong. Then we move on to Doctor Strange, and Doctor Strange is the story of Dr. Stephen Strange, who is a very egotistical neurosurgeon who gets into this freak accident, is lucky to survive, but is unable to control his hands and therefore unable to practice surgery. Then his physical therapist tells him about a man who he treated once who was unable to walk, and a few years later he saw him walking down the street like nothing had ever happened to him, thereby directing Strange to a place in Tibet called Kamar-Taj. Once he makes it there, a man named Mordo actually helps him fight a group of thugs that wanted to steal his watch. He then meets the Sorcerer Supreme, the Ancient One, who is supposed to help him in his mind, but unfortunately is turned away. But upon humbling himself, he starts to learn the secrets of the mystic arts. And not too long after this, Strange gets into a fight with Caecilius, who is this evil wizard who wants to bring the dark dimension to Earth. Now Caecilius and his group of followers make a pact with the being Dormammu, who is in control of the dark dimension, and Earth was on his hit list, so he had to do the bidding anyway. So it's really just a bunch of spiritual attacks that end up with Strange eventually facing Dormammu one-on-one, and it plays out like a Groundhog Day style sort of thing because he keeps dying but he keeps resurrecting. This drives Dormammu crazy, and Strange makes a deal with Dormammu for Dormammu to just go away and bother somebody else but not come back to Earth. But because of Strange's use of magic and his use of the time stone, that's another stone, Mordo says to him, the bill comes due always. Essentially, you take do some, brother, and we take do you, bab. And in the post-credit scene, he further affirms this belief and says he now wants to kill all sorcerers. Then we move on to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, and this story actually happens a few months after the events of Guardians of the Galaxy 1. And in this story, our crew of misfits is supposed to fight off this extraterrestrial threat to a people called the Sovereign. They're able to fight them off, and they go and collect their reward from the Sovereign's leader, Aisha. But Rocket being Rocket, he stole something, and now the Sovereign wanted his head, so they sent a fleet of ships after the Guardians. Basically, it led them into this jump portal, which led them to a certain planet called Ego. And it is on this planet that Peter Quill meets his father. And it's so much information to take because not only does he meet his father, but he realizes that his father is a Celestial, thereby making Peter part human, part Celestial. Crazy. So whilst Peter is bonding with his father and spending less and less time with the Guardians, they do become a little worried about him. And then Ego's big plan is revealed. He essentially wants to take over the whole galaxy, and all he needed was Peter, as he's left seeds all across the universe. He was a very polygamous man, had multiple wives across many different species. The man literally doesn't have a cap. And once he starts to use Peter as an accessory, the Guardians of the Galaxy find a way to fight back, and they all manage to fight Ego. Unfortunately, in this story, we see the death of Yondu Odonta, who is the blue man with the red hair thing. Yeah, so unfortunately, Yondu died after sacrificing himself for Peter. Oh, and I cannot talk about this movie without talking about Baby Groot. Just so adorable. Then we move on to Spider-Man No Way Home, and this is practically the origin story of Peter Parker. We are all familiar with it. It just doesn't have Uncle Ben dying. He already kind of died off screen. No. This movie takes place not too long after the events of Civil War. In this story, Adrian Toomes is supposed to collect alien parts with his crew as part of cleaning up after the Battle of New York. But then their job is taken from them by the DoD, that's the Department of Damage Control. But a few years after that, it is found out that Toomes actually kept the parts that he had excavated from the battle and had been developing the tech into some really crazy stuff. So this crew starts to conduct heists just so they can get by. At the same time, Peter is trying to learn how to be Spider-Man, but also having the watchful eye of Tony Stark on him, he does make a few mistakes. On the flip side, Peter has to deal with people close to him knowing, such as his best friend Ned and ultimately his Aunt May. They also have this friend MJ who they compete with on the school's decathlon team and may or may not know that Peter is Spider-Man at this point in time. Now Peter has a crush on this girl named Liz, and Liz unfortunately is the daughter of Adrian Toomes. So when he goes to try to take her to prom, they have this really weird confrontation, and it does foreshadow the fact that Adrian Toomes is in fact the Vulture who has been conducting heists, and this leads to the ultimate showdown between Toomes and Peter Parker at the end of the movie. In the mid-credit scene, we see that Toomes has been put in prison, where he meets up with another famous Spider-Man villain, the Scorpion, who threatens Peter Parker's life, but Toomes doesn't really respond, pretty much saying he doesn't want anything done to Peter. From there, we move on to Thor Ragnarok, and this pretty much looks at everything that Thor has been through after Age of Ultron. Thor encounters this hellish being named Surtur, who promises to bring the reign of Asgard to an end and destroy the place, which is actually something that happens in Norse mythology. That is what is called Ragnarok. Essentially, all the gods and Asgard are destroyed before there is a recycle, and the gods are reborn and Asgard is reborn. It's kind of like burning down of a phoenix, if you look at it that way. Thor conquers Surtur, makes it back to Asgard, and then realizes that Odin has been putting on plays depicting what happened between Thor and Loki in the Dark World when Loki died, only for Thor to decloak Loki, and well, no one knew where Odin was. Then it's revealed that Loki actually went to put Odin in a retirement home in New York, but when they get there, the retirement home has been demolished, and instead they find him in Norway. And they were able to find Odin with the help of Doctor Strange, who took a hair from Thor's head and cast a spell that was like GPS tracking. And it is there that Odin gives them this warning before he dies: she's coming, your elder sister Hela. And shortly after Odin sprinkles away, that's literally what happened. He didn't dust away or die on the spot. A portal opens and out comes Hela, and she smashes Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, into pieces. She almost kills them, but they escape to the planet Sakaar. Sakaar is like a battle planet where all they do is fight, that is run by the Grand Master. So Thor is put in a battle with a mystery opponent who turns out to be the Incredible Hulk, who we have not seen since the events of Age of Ultron after he escaped on the Quinjet. And the Hulk absolutely does not recognize who Thor is. He smashes him completely, and in the interaction after, we do realize that in fact Hulk has been that way ever since he left and has not transformed once. So when Bruce Banner comes back, it's a bit of a shock to him. Also on this planet, they make the acquaintance of Valkyrie, who actually was a bounty hunter for the Grandmaster. But looking at her backstory, it's then revealed that she indeed was a Valkyrie of Asgard and fought Hela, a battle that unfortunately saw a lot of her sisters die. And she's friends with Hulk, so that makes it even better. So eventually all four of them have to escape the Grandmaster's planet and head back to Asgard, where Hela has killed the Warriors 3 and is absolutely ruling over Asgard. Oh, and Loki was following close behind, so don't worry about him, he did not get left behind. Thor battles Hela, and unfortunately he loses an eye after Hela cut it, but it is in that moment that he finds the true depths of his power and he is able to defeat Hela, sort of, to a degree, because the Surtur dude just came out of nowhere with a large sword preparing to destroy Asgard. And it's in that moment that Thor realizes that no, Asgard is not a place, it's a people. These are the exact words that his father said to him. So they evacuate the people on this ship and leave as Surtur destroys Hela and Asgard with it. So the people of Asgard are now migrants trying to find a new home. Thor and Loki have seemingly bonded, only to be confronted by a large ship at the end of the movie, and we don't see what happens until Infinity War. So the story of Black Panther happens just about a week after the events of Captain America's Civil War. It follows the story of T'Challa and the people of Wakanda. In the MCU, Wakanda is this nation that hides itself within Central Africa, so not too many people actually know about it, but they are the most technologically advanced nation on the entire planet. Now the leader, known as the Black Panther, who has to be imbued with strength in order to protect such a nation, has to consume a potion that is made of the heart-shaped herb. But if anyone ever arises as a challenger to this leader, as they see themselves as a better one, then they have to fight at a waterfall, and the leader has to drink this potion that will, and I quote this, I'm not even joking, the strength of the Black Panther will be stripped away. Total violation of how we speak in Africa, like, God damn it. And that's exactly what happens in this movie, because early on, T'Challa, when he was about to be named the ruler of Wakanda, is challenged by his cousin M'Baku. So once again, T'Challa drank the potion and the strength of the Black Panther was stripped away. Thankfully, T'Challa got his cousin to surrender after combat for a few minutes, and he was named the ruler of Wakanda. So then the story pivots to another character, Eric Killmonger, and he causes this raid and steals an artifact from the British Museum, which apparently was Wakandan and made of vibranium, the one metal that can be made in Wakanda. Now Killmonger, amongst many other things, is on a revenge mission because his father was killed by T'Challa's father. His father was actually T'Chaka's brother. Now, how they ended up in the US was Wakanda had spies all over the world, and one of these spies was Eric Killmonger's dad. But he had practically committed treason, and that's the reason why T'Chaka came for his brother. But unfortunately, they got into a fight and T'Chaka killed his brother. Now, Killmonger also has Ulysses Claw helping him out, and once they get to the border of Wakanda, Claw seeing the opportunity to get vibranium and Killmonger seeing him as the scavenger that he is, Killmonger kills him. And then upon getting an audience with T'Challa the king, he reveals his true identity as Wakandan and challenges T'Challa for his seat and practically makes him in their battle. And then he throws him off the warrior falls, so everyone has a belief that T'Challa did not survive, he died. Which I now realize is very terrible foreshadowing because of what happened to Chadwick Boseman. Rest in peace, big man, we love you. Killmonger then assumes the seat of power in Wakanda and starts to make some decisions that otherwise would not have been made. They were rash, but they kind of made some sense if you look at it, because Wakandan people, like many other Africans, have been taken advantage of throughout the years, and so Killmonger sought to rectify this wrong, although the methods were quite questionable. Now, somehow T'Challa survived and was actually rescued by M'Baku's people, and Shuri and T'Challa's mom were able to bring a portion of the heart-shaped herb, and once T'Challa consumed it, he regained consciousness and strength and was ready to reclaim his throne. So a massive fight breaks out and T'Challa and his squad come out on top. Unfortunately, Killmonger is killed at the end of all this. In the mid-credit scene of the movie, we see T'Challa addressing the UN, making them know about Wakanda for the first time. And in the post-credit scene, we see that Bucky has been recovering and he is now known as the White Wolf. But then he seems to be at peace, and then T'Challa approaches him, telling him about something that's about to happen. Then we come to Avengers Infinity War, and this is the story of Thanos' conquest. The movie picks up exactly where Thor Ragnarok left off, with Thanos' Sanctuary 2 ship attacking Thor's ship with the Asgardians. So Thanos does a couple of things. He already has the Power Stone. He obtains the Space Stone from Loki, who had the Tesseract the whole time. And then he kills Loki by cracking his neck, practically making his death permanent this time. He also killed Heimdall after he transferred Hulk back to Earth using the Bifrost for the last time. So he practically left Thor as the only surviving member as he destroyed the ship with the Power Stone. Hulk then arrives on Earth, crashes into the Sanctum Sanctorum, which is Doctor Strange's home, and tells Doctor Strange and Wong that Thanos is coming. And Doctor Strange seeks an audience with Tony Stark, who is in a park nearby, and asks him to come with him. And they explain the concept of the Infinity Stones, which are these 6 singularities that control major aspects of the universe, which are space, power, reality, soul, mind, and time. And shortly after this explanation, people start running on the street, and when all the men inside get out, they see this ship that is invading Earth and is part of Thanos' crew that have come to take the time stone from Doctor Strange. And this led to a battle we saw Spider-Man come from a school bus just to help out, as well as Hulk starting to have issues with Bruce Banner by not coming out. Eventually, Doctor Strange is captured. Spider-Man closely follows, as well as Iron Man, as they go into outer space on this ship. Meanwhile, the Guardians of the Galaxy are speeding through space, and they come across the Asgardian wreckage, where they meet Thor, nurture him, and then Gamora talks about what Thanos is planning to do once he gets all the stones. So Thor makes it clear that he has to get in the Nidavellir, where he has to make a new weapon that would allow him to take on Thanos. So the Guardians split. Rocket and Groot go with Thor, and Mantis, Gamora, Peter Quill, and Drax stay behind. Meanwhile, in Europe, we see that Wanda and Vision have been living together for quite some time and developed a romantic bond in the process. And Vision appears to be struggling because the Mind Stone appears to be talking. It's almost like that AI of sentience is starting to communicate with him. And as they are going for a walk, 2 more of Thanos' minions attack Vision, and they leave him very badly wounded, whilst Wanda tries to fend them off before she gets help from a returning Steve Rogers, Black Widow, and Sam Wilson as the Falcon. And after fending them off, they try to get help by taking Vision back to Avengers compound to see if anything can be done. Over there, they are met by Rhodey, who is thankfully walking now thanks to the assistance of a device that he has to wear at all times. And Rhodey is in a meeting with Thunderbolt Ross, who we last saw in Civil War presenting the Sokovia Accords to the Avengers. This also serves as a reunion for Natasha and Hulk, who had developed a romantic relationship in Avengers Age of Ultron. So they figure out that Vision needs to be taken to Wakanda as soon as possible. Over there, Shuri evaluates him and decides that the Mind Stone can actually be taken out of Vision's head so that he's not so much of a target. It just will take so much time because it's such an intricate system. Meanwhile, on the Q ship, Doctor Strange is being tortured until Spider-Man and Iron Man find a way to save him by blowing Ebony Maw into space. After that, they come into a bit of a dilemma as to what to do next, whether to go back to Earth or find another planet where they may be able to take on Thanos and not have to risk the lives of the people on Earth. Meanwhile, the other Guardians of the Galaxy have reached nowhere, where they find that the planet is absolutely wrecked. Thanos has come to take the Reality Stone from the Collector, and then he captures Gamora in order to spare the lives of the other Guardians. Meanwhile, Thor, Groot, and Rocket reach Nidavellir, where they meet Eitri, the giant dwarf who is supposed to help them craft a new weapon for Thor. He recommends that they make Stormbreaker, as in theory it will also be able to summon the Bifrost, and they are going to make this weapon out of Uru metal, the same metal that was used to create Mjolnir. Back on the ship with Iron Man, Spider-Man, and Doctor Strange, Peter Quill's gang have actually tracked the ship down and have planned to attack them, only for them to realize they are on the same side as they head to the planet Titan. Meanwhile, on Thanos' ship, Thanos reveals to Gamora that he actually has her sister and is trying to get information out of her after she nearly killed him. And it is in one of these torturing sessions that it is revealed that in fact Nebula knows exactly where the Soul Stone is but bent the map to it. And Gamora knows because Nebula told her, and it is on the planet of Vormir. So Thanos and Gamora make a journey to Vormir, where they meet this mysterious hooded figure who is supposed to be a guide to people that want the Soul Stone. And as it would turn out, this guide is none other than Red Skull, who we have not seen since Captain America the First Avenger. So this is where he was transported. And then Red Skull makes the shocking revelation that you have to sacrifice someone you love. Thanos starts to cry, and then he throws Gamora off a cliff and obtains the Power Stone. Gamora is dead. R.I.P. So at this juncture, Thanos has the space, power, reality, and soul stones. He's left with 2 stones, and he decides to go to his home planet of Titan. Meanwhile, Thanos' forces are at the border of Wakanda, where they try to attack the Avengers, and eventually they get in and it becomes a really messy fight as they try to remove the Mind Stone from the head of Vision. Now back to Nidavellir, some of the machinery that Eitri would use to create this weapon for Thor is broken, and so Thor has to open a forge which would harness the power of a star directly. Now unfortunately or not, this power goes directly through Thor, but he decides to hold it because yeah, he's Thor. And Eitri is able to craft the axe portion of the weapon but cannot find the handle. And this is where Groot steps up, sacrificing his own arm in order to create a handle for Thor, and it works perfectly fine. It revives Thor. Meanwhile, the battle in Wakanda is getting heated and the Avengers seem to be losing when out of nowhere the Bifrost hits the ground and Thor makes one of the most epic entrances in MCU history. Now at the same time, Thanos arrives on Titan where he hopes to collect another stone. He interacts with Doctor Strange and reveals exactly why he is doing this. You see, Thanos realized there was an essential problem on Titan. The resources were not enough to go around, and he actually proposed that some of the population be killed. But they thought of him to be a madman, and then the planet went into a debacle, so he was somewhat right, but the guilt of it alone made him want to find a solution, and that's why he started going after the Infinity Stones. He then goes to battle with the members of the Avengers and Guardians of the Galaxy that are available at that point in time, but he defeats them and is able to obtain the Time Stone from Doctor Strange. Oh, and Tony Stark also got stabbed, which was very heart-wrenching. We all thought he was gonna die. Meanwhile, on Earth, Vision is forced to fight alongside his counterparts after he has been attacked during this whole process that was supposed to take the stone out of his head. And then things seemingly start to quiet down, only heralding the arrival of Thanos, who is here for the final stone, and actually the stone that he had started with. This forces Wanda to make the tough decision to blow the stone out of Vision's head, which would ultimately kill him, and she does succeed, but Thanos, because he has the Mind Stone, reverses time, brings Vision back to life, only to rip the stone out of his head, leaving him like that. And so Thanos, uniting all the stones, has reached God mode when Thor blasts him out of nowhere and hits him square in the chest and asks for revenge, but Thanos retorts saying, "You should have gone for the head," and snaps. And so was the case. Thanos had won. Half of the population across the universe was wiped out, dusted. with no hope in sight for anybody else. The snap did cause a ton of damage on Thanos' arm. However, he was able to escape Thor and transported himself to a garden planet where he hung his armor like a scarecrow and sat down looking at the sunrise on, in his words, a grateful universe. At the same time, Nick Fury and Maria Hill are driving through New York when cars and planes start crashing, and then Maria Hill starts dusting off, and Nick Fury knows he has to call someone with a pager. He does so, but also dusts in the process. The pager does get a signal, and the symbol on the pager is that of Captain Marvel. Then we move on to Ant-Man and the Wasp, which happens a few weeks before the events of Infinity War. And in this story, we see the importance of the quantum realm. It is revealed that Hank Pym and his wife used to go on missions, and on one such mission, they were supposed to destabilize a missile that was approaching the United States. And because one part of Hank Pym's equipment got faulty, his wife Janet Van Dyne made the ultimate sacrifice by shrinking herself so that she could go in between the particles of the missile and disable it completely, at the cost of going into the quantum realm and possibly getting lost forever. So basically, the story is about getting Janet Van Dyne back from the quantum realm and back on normal Earth. This movie introduces the character of Ghost, who actually was the victim of an accident gone wrong. Basically, her father's experiment exploded and she became the victim of this phase shifting phenomenon. But in the end, they are able to get Janet Van Dyne back from the quantum realm, and they also find a way to be able to help Ghost combat what she's dealing with. So the post-credit scene happens at the same time as Infinity War. Basically, Scott is supposed to go and collect particles from the quantum realm, and when he's supposed to be pulled back up, everyone else is dusted, so he is stuck in the quantum realm with no guaranteed way of coming back. And then we have Captain Marvel in 2019. Now, the events of the movie are set in 1995, and it follows the story of Carol Danvers. She was an Air Force pilot up until her disappearance around 1989. This movie makes an attempt to dive into the extraterrestrial life of the MCU by looking at the Kree and Skrull races. When the movie starts, Carol is on the planet Hala, where she is being referred to as Viers. She seems to have a very good friendship with Yon Rog, who is her mentor, and goes to the ruler of the Kree called the Supreme Intelligence, which basically hands her her orders and motivation to go onto Skrull territory and try as much as possible to eliminate any threats to the Kree race, which would be the Skrull. So she and her crew go to this planet called Tofa, where they try to eliminate some Kree, but things go wrong and somehow, someway she ends up on Earth. And it is from there that things start to get really weird, because she meets a young Nick Fury and Phil Coulson, as well as her best friend Maria Rambeau and her daughter Monica Rambeau, who has very fond memories of her. It's also in that moment that the misinformation about the Skrull people is made known to Carol, that she's practically been fighting a misguided fight this entire time. The movie also shows you how she got her power after exposure from the space stone. It's not a throwaway movie, it's definitely fun to watch. It's not in the worst movie category, at least in my opinion. Oh, and we also saw why Nick Fury wears an eye patch. It's because this cat, no, it's a flurkin, actually scratched him, so that was all on him. And it is in the end of the movie that we see the genesis of the Avenger initiative that Nick Fury has started. In the end, Carol also leaves Earth to help the Skrulls to find a new planet to habitate. The post-credit scene shows the direct aftermath of Avengers Endgame, and we see Steve Rogers, Natasha Romanoff, Bruce Banner, as well as James Rhodes trying to figure out what is happening and how many people have been lost on Earth across the countries. Nick Fury's pager had suddenly stopped beeping, and they were trying to figure out what that meant when out of nowhere Carol Danvers shows up asking for the whereabouts of Fury. And this leads us to quite possibly my favorite MCU movie of all time, Avengers Endgame. In the opening scenes, we see Clint Barton lose his entire family to Thanos' snap, and then we see Tony Stark and Nebula on the Guardians of the Galaxy ship trying to make it back to Earth, but having run out of fuel and food and water. It was a dire situation, and most likely Tony Stark was going to die. And all hope seems to be lost until they are saved and brought back to Earth by Carol Danvers. From there, we see the remaining Avengers and Guardians of the Galaxy try to come up with a plan to locate Thanos and kill him. So they make their way to Thanos' planet, where they realize he is alone, and once they are able to capture him, Thor actually kills him after Thanos revealed that he used the Infinity Stones to destroy the stones. So 5 years pass, and Steve Rogers is now a counselor. Natasha Romanoff lives alone in Avengers HQ, and in the most improbable event, Scott Lang was aided out of the quantum realm by a mouse pressing a button. Thank you, Mickey Mouse. You didn't need to make it that apparent. So Scott reunites with his daughter Cassie, who has grown so much, and then he makes his way to Avengers HQ at the same time as Natasha and Steve are there. And then he explains to them how the quantum realm works and how it may be possible to use it as a conduit of time travel in order to defeat Thanos and bring everybody back. So they find a way and they go to Tony Stark, who now has a daughter, Morgan. And they try to discuss the possibility of bringing everybody back, but he shuts it down. Then they go to Bruce Banner, who shockingly has transformed into the Smart Hulk. Basically, the Smart Hulk is an amalgamation of his Bruce Banner self and the Hulk self. So Tony, being the tinkerer that he is, actually finds a way to make this a possibility. The next day, he heads to Avengers HQ, reconciles with Cap, and hands him his shield back. Meanwhile, the group starts experimenting with time travel and decides that they have to get everybody back. So they go to Tonsberg, Norway, which is now New Asgard, where they find Thor, Meek, and Korg. And in this time, Thor had put on so much weight you would almost think he was on My 600-Pound Life on TLC. Meanwhile, Natasha goes to find Clint after hearing about a spree of killings that this person called the Ronin has been conducting all across the world. And the Ronin is none other than Clint himself. She finds a way to bring him back home. So according to MCU rules, when you go back to the past to change something, it does not alter the future but rather creates a branch reality. So it's not like Back to the Future where you go and change something to your past and immediately expect an effect in the future. And this leads the group to be able to pick out possible moments where they have the best chances to get the Infinity Stones in the timeline. So Cap, Tony, Scott Lang, and Hulk go to New York in 2012, where they have the possibility to capture the scepter with the Mind Stone, the Space Stone in the Tesseract, and the Time Stone from the Ancient One at the Sanctum Sanctorum. And then Thor and Rocket go to Asgard in 2013 on the day which Frigga was killed. Then Nebula, Rhodey, Black Widow, and Clint go to 2014 to Morag, where the orb containing the Power Stone was, but also where they can get the Soul Stone from Vormir. And for the most part, their journeys are successful. However, something went wrong with the Power Stone and it got into Loki's hands and Loki escaped, which is something that did not happen originally, and we will talk about this down the road. This in itself forced the hand of Tony Stark and Captain America to go back into the 1970s to Camp Lehigh, where the Tesseract was being kept. And in this moment, Tony Stark met his dad and it was one of the most wholesome interactions, but it also had one of the biggest reveals in MCU history of Jarvis. Now Jarvis was the driver for Howard Stark, and he was a character on the ABC show Agent Carter, which was supposed to follow up from the events of Captain America the First Avenger. Meanwhile, Thor has an emotional reunion with his mom and he actually manages to get Mjolnir from that timeline. That Thor is going to be really upset. And with the Mora group, Rhodey and Nebula are able to obtain the orb after knocking Peter Quill out from 2014. Meanwhile, Natasha and Clint go to Vormir, where they once again encounter Red Skull, who presents them with the same option as he had done to Thanos not too long before. They get into a bit of a spat and Natasha is the one to die, unfortunately. So they all come back from their missions, and after grieving for a while, they find a way to construct a brand new Infinity Gauntlet, and then Hulk decides to be the one to snap people back into existence. And it works, but it comes at the cost of damaging his right arm in the same way that Thanos damaged his left arm when he was snapping people away. But you see, everything was not going to be rosy because the Nebula that had come back wasn't the Nebula that had left. Let me explain. So right before our Nebula, that's 2023 Nebula, and Rhodey were about to leave and come back, Nebula couldn't go because a dynamic link had been established between herself and her 2014 version.
The Bluetooth device is ready to pair,
which Thanos was extracting memories from. And somehow through this, Thanos had been able to see his future and what happens to him. And 2014 Gamora is right there. She's not exactly reformed yet. So Thanos and his crew capture 2023 Nebula from Morag, and then they use the pin particles that Nebula had used to transport herself into 2014 so that 2014 versions of Thanos and everyone else could come into the 2023 reality that we are presently in at this time. So whilst Hulk is ready to snap, 2014 Nebula finds a way to input coordinates and allows for the 2014 versions of Thanos to come into our reality. He then launches an attack on Avengers HQ, faces off with the OG3 of Tony, Cap, and Thor. And it is at this moment that Captain America raises Mjolnir, showing that he was in fact worthy of wielding the hammer, as no one had been able to except for Thor. But eventually it looks as though he is defeated and Thanos is about to wipe him off, so it's just him versus all of Thanos' minions and Thanos himself when he hears the iconic words "on your left," and everyone comes back in the most amazing portal scene you... Oh my god, I still cry whenever I see this thing. And ladies and gentlemen, this is what we call the Battle of Earth. Everyone returning from dust and the dead to face 2014 Thanos. And if not for Thanos calling for help, Wanda would have killed Thanos on her own. and she wasn't even the Scarlet Witch yet. Eventually, Tony and Doctor Strange reunite, and in a moment of non-verbal communication, Doctor Strange puts his hand out and signals 1, and Tony almost instantly knows what he has to do. You see, this is something I did not mention in Infinity War, but Doctor Strange actually had the chance to peer through every single possibility that would allow them to win that war back in 2017, and he said there was only one way. And this is what he was referring to. Tony Stark found a way to use his nanotechnology to get the stones from Thanos' gauntlet, and so he did it. He snapped all of Thanos' forces and 2014 Thanos himself. But unfortunately, this came at the cost of his life. Tony has a sentimental funeral where Harley Quinn from Iron Man 3, grown up now, actually comes and pays his respects to him. In the aftermath, Thor decides to hand over power of ruling Asgard to Valkyrie as he leaves on the ship with the Guardians of the Galaxy. 2014 Gamora was not snapped, but no one knows where she is. So their next job is to try and find her. Meanwhile, Captain America is placed with the objective of placing back the stones from the moments in time from which they took them. He seemingly says goodbye to Bucky, and he's supposed to come back in about 5 seconds, but he never comes back. And then we notice this old man sitting by himself by a lake just close to where they are set up. Bucky tells Sam Wilson, who is over there, to go and check on who it is, and they realize it is Captain America Steve Rogers, only very old man. He then has this very heartfelt conversation where he passes down the mantle of Captain America to Sam Wilson. And in the ending shot of the movie, we see Steve Rogers has returned to his one true love, Peggy Carter. Our next movie is the final movie of Phase 3 of the MCU, which is Spider-Man Far From Home. Taking place 8 months after the events of Avengers Endgame, this centers on Peter Parker and his struggle of accepting that Iron Man is truly gone. The movie centers around the trip that his class group has to take to Europe, and on there, Peter's best friend Ned starts dating this girl Betty Brant, who actually is like the school journalist. Meanwhile, Peter becomes very expressive of his feelings for MJ. On that trip, a mysterious water monster starts to attack, and Peter is forced to deal with the situation, but not before a cloaked fishbowl-headed figure comes to help. And after vanquishing that foe, the media starts to call this person Mysterio. Later, Nick Fury comes to Peter Parker's room, tells him to get up and get dressed and follow him. They go into this cave where there's this elaborate setup, and Peter Parker meets the fishbowl head man, who is Quentin Beck. Quentin Beck then says he's from Earth 833, whilst this Earth is 8616, and he's actually come here to fight the elementals, which are these creatures that destroyed his home planet and took his family away from him. At this point, he had already fought the Earth Elemental at the start, and they had just fought the Water one, meaning there were 2 more to go. The Fire Elemental and Wind Elemental, kind of like a Captain Planet thing.
Fire! Wind! Water! Heart! Go Planet! Captain Planet, he's our hero.
In the meantime, Nick Fury hands Peter these glasses, which are Edith glasses from Tony Stark. And the Edith stands for Even in Death, I'm the Hero. Classic. This grants Peter AI access to not only himself but also to Stark technology in space. And this becomes a huge point of contention, where at one point Quentin Beck actually convinces Peter to give him the Edith glasses since he would know what to do with them. It's in that moment that after Peter is gone, he reveals himself as being a liar and have played everybody the whole time. He really just wanted revenge for Tony Stark not crediting him for building the BAF technology that had enabled him to project holograms that looked very realistic. And Quentin Beck had an entire team made up of former Stark Industries employees who were very disgruntled as he was. So for the most part, all of it was just show, because the elementals weren't even real, even though they caused a lot of damage. This leads to an ultimate showdown in London where Peter faces Quentin Beck and eventually disarms him, but unfortunately it does look like Quentin Beck loses his life in the end. So at the very end of the movie, Peter and MJ are about to go on a date swinging through the city when suddenly J. Jonah Jameson appears on the screen to break some news that Peter Parker in fact was Spider-Man, outing him to the general public. And in addition, Quentin Beck also twisted the story and said Peter was responsible for the drone attack that he had to vanquish whilst they were on the London Bridge. This moment is very significant because contrary to the norm we've established with the MCU, Peter was in fact the only superhero that had a secret identity, which made sense because he was a high schooler and you want to be able to protect someone of that age.
Sleeping on me at my feet is where you'll lay, and take your head down on your knees like you pray. It's cool, I continue to kick push like Lupe, but if you ain't grinding with me now, the grind is where you'll stay. They want me quiet, you can watch me be discreet. Now I'm silent when I speak, mama telling me to